At exactly 0530, Sarah Bennett walked into the mission briefing room at Canyon Ridge Air Force Base. She didn't wear medals or carry authority, just a clipboard tucked against her chest and a quietness that seemed to mute the air around her. Her uniform was perfect, but plain. Her posture upright, but unassuming. No one looked twice. The room buzzed with the energy of men and women used to being heard. Airmen leaned back in their chairs, confident in their ranks and reputations. Colonel Grant stood at the front, tall and broad, his rows of ribbons gleaming beneath fluorescent lights. The map on the screen behind him showed red lines crawling across a mountain range. Wildfires, moving fast, lives at risk. He barked out flight assignments like they were math problems, each name landing with weight. No one noticed the clerk in the corner scribbling details into her notes. Sarah sat still, her face unreadable, her eyes fixed on the plan. The colonel pointed again. 4 aircraft, 1 corridor. The words seemed simple. The numbers didn't work. Her fingers tightened around the pen, and then she did the thing no one expected. She raised her hand. The pause hit like a static pop. Then the laughter. First from the younger pilots, Thompson chuckled loudest, leaning forward in his seat like he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. Even more usually quieter snorted under her breath. The colonel looked up slowly, surprised more than anything, like a coffee machine had suddenly spoken. Sarah lowered her hand a little, but kept it up, her voice low and steady. She said 4 planes weren't enough. Not for that spread. Not for that terrain. Another wave of laughter rolled through the room. It wasn't angry. It was dismissive. The kind of laughter that closed doors without needing to slam them. Someone joked about Top Gun. Someone else asked if she'd Googled firefighting tactics the night before. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the map, at the red crawling closer to the blue dots that represented trapped teams. No one asked how she knew. No one asked who she'd been before she became invisible. But one man in the back, older, quieter, watched her differently. And somewhere beneath the noise a shift had started, one no one saw coming. Sarah lived in a second-floor apartment 5 miles from the base, tucked behind a faded gas station and a diner that never closed. The unit was small, no bigger than a storage room with bare walls and furniture that could be counted on one hand. A single bed, a metal desk, one wooden chair with a worn cushion she never bothered to replace. She kept the place tidy, but impersonal, like she might leave at any moment. No photos on the fridge, no books on the shelf. The only part of the room that felt truly lived in was the locked drawer beside her bed. Inside it sat a small wooden box, the corners smoothed by years of touch. It was the only thing in her life that looked older than she did. Every evening when the sun began to drop behind the desert ridge, Sarah would sit by the window and open that drawer. The box clicked softly when she lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items. A black and white photo of a flight squadron, edges curling with time. A silver pilot's wings pin dulled by fingerprints, and a folded letter with handwriting that trembled just slightly at the edges. She never read the letter anymore, not really. She just held it. Sometimes her fingers would trace the outline of the wings like muscle memory, reaching for something her mind no longer let her claim. The photo stayed untouched, but her eyes always found the man standing 2 rows back, smiling, just enough to suggest he didn't like cameras. From her window, Sarah could see the flight line in the distance. The roar of A-10s taking off cut across the desert like a voice she hadn't heard in years. She watched each one rise into the sky with a gaze that never blinked. Her back stayed straight. Her hands rested on her knees. But her breathing changed just slightly, like her body knew what her mind refused to say. She had been up there once. Not behind a clipboard, not watching from the ground. But the world had changed, and she had let it. Now she counted inventory and tracked fuel logs while someone else took the stick. Still, every night she watched those jets leave and return. And for a few minutes, as their shadows stretched long across the sand, Sarah Bennett wasn't a supply clerk. She was something else. Something the wind hadn't quite forgotten. Rodriguez had worked in hangars longer than most of the kids' flying planes had been alive. 60 years old, with a back that cracked every time he stood up too fast, and hands that still remembered every bolt and panel of the A-10 Thunderbolt. He didn't waste words or time. But he noticed people, especially the quiet ones. He'd seen Sarah Bennett around the base, always early, always precise. Never late, never loud. She moved like someone trying not to leave a mark, but something about her never sat right with him. Most clerks avoided the hangars. Sarah didn't. Sometimes during her lunch break, she'd disappear and end up near the flight line eyes tracking aircraft like they were old friends instead of tools. One day he caught her alone beside an A-10 in Hangar 4. No clipboard, no uniform jacket, just her hand resting on the cold titanium skin like she knew it, not like a tourist, like someone saying hello to something she hadn't touched in years. She didn't hear him at first. The way she stood there, still as stone. He almost didn't want to break the moment. "You've flown one of these?" he asked, voice soft, more curious than accusing. Sarah turned slowly, not startled, just aware. Her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes didn't follow. The smile faded as fast as it came. "A long time ago," she said. And that was all. She stepped away before he could ask anything else. Rodriguez didn't press. He'd seen that look before. Not fear, not pride. Something heavier. Like a pilot grounded not by protocol but by ghosts. Most people around here were climbing ranks trying to make names. Sarah looked like someone trying to forget hers. After that, he started watching closer. The way her gaze lingered on flight paths drawn on whiteboards. The way she flinched slightly when cannon specs were mentioned in casual conversation. The way her fingers moved mid-air drawing patterns that weren't for paperwork but for maneuvers. She never spoke up, never gave anything away. But he knew. People who've spent a lifetime around jets can tell the difference. A supply clerk does not stand beside an aircraft like that. She didn't touch it like it was a machine. She touched it like it remembered her. And for a moment the A-10 almost looked like it did. The mission briefing room at Canyon Ridge Air Force Base hummed with controlled urgency. Rows of pilots and officers filled the long tables, some leaning forward with sharp focus, others relaxed like they already knew they'd be flying. Silver wings and combat ribbons caught the light as Colonel Grant stepped up to the front, his voice cutting through the room with practiced force. The digital map behind him flickered to life, bright lines crawling over the San Gabriel Mountains. A wildfire had jumped containment lines. Over 500 firefighters were trapped, and civilian aircraft couldn't handle the smoke or terrain. Grant didn't waste time. He laid out the plan in clipped orders. 4 aircraft, suppression formation, standard altitude and sweep, extraction corridors at 3 choke points. Sarah sat in the back corner, mostly hidden behind a taller lieutenant, clipboard in hand. No one looked at her. She wasn't part of the operation. Just support. Just logistics. She wrote fast, her eyes jumping between the map and the numbers. It didn't add up. Not with wind speeds like that. Not with the rate of fire spread he was describing. 4 planes wouldn't do it. Her hand went up before she even thought about it. The reaction was instant. Heads turned. Chairs creaked. Someone laughed. Thompson, the youngest of the squadron leads, leaned back and grinned like he'd just spotted a joke in the wild. He raised his eyebrows and tilted his head. "The clerk has an opinion." "That's new." The laughter spread. It wasn't cruel. That made it worse. It was casual, comfortable. The kind of dismissal that came from people so sure of their place they didn't even notice who they were stepping on. Sarah kept her voice steady. She said 4 aircraft wouldn't be enough. The wind was shifting faster than projected. The canyon funnels would double the speed by afternoon. The drop windows would miss the active burn lines. Grant let her finish barely. Captain Moore chimed in before he could respond. Something snide about Top Gun reruns. Something about how logistics officers don't get to rewrite tactical plans. Sarah stood a little straighter but didn't answer. The colonel raised a hand and the noise dropped off. He gave her a tight official smile. Appreciated the enthusiasm. Noted the concern. But this was a real operation. With real pilots. Not a theory test. The subtle edge in his voice drew a few more chuckles. Sarah nodded once and sat back down. But then she spoke again. Quiet. Firm. She said she was rated on the A-10. The room went still for half a second, then exploded again. Louder this time. Thompson stood and walked toward her row. Big frame. Big smirk. He threw out a quick-fire question about the GAU-8 cannon. She answered without blinking. He frowned. Moore asked about canyon handling under crosswinds. Sarah laid out the angles, the throttle corrections, and burst fire stabilization. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. Colonel Grant stared at her for a moment too long. Then he shook his head. Textbook answers, he said. Google specs. That wasn't flying. That was reciting. He asked if she'd ever flown in combat. Ever heard a missile lock tone in her headset? Ever lost a wingman mid-flight? Sarah didn't speak. He dismissed her with a wave. Told her to get back to her desk. The briefing continued. But the room had changed. Something quiet had cracked beneath all the noise. And for the first time, a few people were no longer laughing. Thompson didn't sit down after the laughter faded. He stayed standing tall and smug arms crossed like he was about to teach a lesson. He fired off the first question with the casual cruelty of someone expecting to win. What's the GAU-8's firing rate? Sarah answered without hesitation. 3,900 rounds per minute. He blinked, then asked the combat radius. 800 nautical miles, 288 when fully loaded. A small flicker crossed his face. It wasn't respect. It was confusion. He hadn't expected her to know. Moore jumped in trying to regain the room. She asked how to handle an A-10 carrying full loadout in a narrow canyon with a 40-knot crosswind. Sarah responded with clean exact numbers. Bank under 30 degrees. Keep a positive pitch of 2 to 3 degrees. Short burst fire only near rock walls. The air in the room shifted, but no one admitted it. Someone in the back muttered about her memorizing a manual. Another pilot whispered that she probably watched too many training videos. The mockery didn't fade. It morphed, turned from disbelief into disbelief coated with sarcasm. Grant stood still, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped forward and asked one question. Had she ever flown through a canyon under fire? Had she ever lost power mid-turn with lives depending on her? Had she ever had a missile lock in her ear? And 2 seconds to live. Sarah said nothing. Her lips pressed into a line, her fingers curled tighter around the clipboard. Grant gave a smile that held no warmth. That's what he thought. He told her textbook answers didn't matter in combat. That real flying wasn't something you learned by reading. He didn't shout. He didn't insult her, but his voice cut through her like steel wrapped in protocol. He thanked her for her input and told her to return to her duties. Sarah nodded once. She sat down slowly. Her shoulders were straight, but her head was low. Her throat tightened, but she didn't speak. Around her, the room went back to planning like she hadn't existed a moment ago. Only one thing stayed with her, the silence between her answer and their rejection. Not because she was wrong, but because no one wanted her to be right. The sky over Kandahar had been a burnt orange haze, thick with heat and smoke. Sarah flew lead in a formation of 4 A-10's call sign Ghost 1. They were on an urgent support run, scrambling to help an infantry unit pinned down near a valley cut too deep for satellites and too narrow for helicopters. David flew on her wing, older, sharper, steady in ways she still admired. He warned her over comms. Intel spotted possible SAM sites near the ridge. He suggested they hold for confirmation. She looked down at the blinking distress signals on her HUD. 15 soldiers running out of time, out of cover, out of luck. She said no. They couldn't wait. Her first run dropped low and fast. The GAU-8 roared as she lit up enemy positions with precise bursts. Dust kicked up like thunder bodies scattered, and radio chatter surged with hope. The second pass was clean, cleaner than it should have been. David said he'd follow her in tighter this time. He covered the southern ridge while she cleared a path through the center. Then it happened. Her missile warning screamed. She pulled hard left and dumped flares. The first missile missed by inches. She turned her head just in time to see David's jet catch the second. A flash, then fire, then black spiraling smoke across the blue. His voice came through the headset, ragged and cracking. Told her to finish it. Told her they still needed her. She wanted to turn back. She wanted to find where he fell. But she made the call. Sarah made 9 more runs that day. She cleared the last of the enemy positions and carved out a landing zone for evac. All 15 soldiers made it out alive. Not one scratch. But David didn't. They found what was left of his aircraft 2 days later. She never asked for the report. Back in Arizona, she walked out of the briefing room with Colonel Grant's words still echoing in her ears. Her boots struck the floor in rhythm, but her breath came uneven. Her fingers ached from clenching the clipboard. She didn't look back at the pilots. She didn't need to. The ghosts followed her either way. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she stepped out into the afternoon sun, the brightness biting at her eyes after the cold indifference of the briefing room. She didn't check it at first. She walked halfway to the admin building before the second buzz made her stop. A message from Rodriguez blinked on the screen. Don't let them win. David wouldn't want this. Then another. Hangar 7. Come alone. The message hit like a pressure drop. Her lungs tightened around it. She turned without thinking, her boots finding their way across the tarmac like the map had always been in her bones. Hangar 7 sat farther out, away from the noise and traffic, the kind of place where forgotten things were kept out of view. Rodriguez stood at the edge of the open doors, arms folded, looking like he'd been waiting for hours. He nodded once, then stepped aside. Inside the hangar felt like a different kind of quiet. Not emptiness, reverence. The air smelled of oil and time and metal long at rest. A single aircraft sat beneath a tarp, big, heavy, sleeping. He pulled back the cover without a word. Sarah froze. The black paint had dulled, but the shape was unmistakable. Her A-10. Ghost. Her name was still there, faded and scuffed near the cockpit. But it was the marks that stopped her breath. 47 small white symbols along the fuselage, each one carefully hand-painted, each one a life saved. Rodriguez stepped closer, voice low. She's been here the whole time. Still flight-worthy. Still yours. Sarah didn't move. Her fingers itched, but she didn't reach out. Not yet. He led her to a small workbench near the wall. Laid out on top was a flight bag, her name stitched in worn thread. The zipper opened with a tug, stiff from disuse. Inside, her old helmet, her patches. The gloves she used to swear were lucky. She picked one up, held it to her face, and breathed in the faint trace of jet fuel and desert wind. Rodriguez sat on a nearby stool, elbows resting on his knees. You didn't stop flying because you weren't good. You stopped because you cared too much. That's not weakness. That's what made you dangerous in the right way. She turned away, eyes stinging. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I made the wrong call. David died. Rodriguez didn't flinch. David made his own call. He stayed with you because he knew you'd bring the rest home. She closed her eyes. Behind her lids, fire, a spinning sky, a voice fading through static. Save them. Every night since that line had found her. Not as comfort, as punishment. She sat down on the edge of the aircraft's wing. The metal was cool under her hands, steady, familiar, like a place she hadn't dared return to. Her fingers traced the 47th mark. Then they paused. That one, Rodriguez said gently, was the last one before Kandahar. After that, they stopped counting. She looked at him, eyes tired but sharper than they'd been in years. What if I freeze again? What if I lead someone into the same fire and don't get them out? He stood slowly. Then they'll follow you because they know what it cost you, and because you're still here. Sarah looked down. Her chest ached with memory, but beneath the ache something else stirred. Not peace, not yet, but something close to it, a step toward it. She pulled a folded paper from her back pocket. The letter. Still unfinished. Still unsent. Dear Emily, he wanted to save them. I made sure he didn't die for nothing. I just wish I could have done both. She looked up at the A-10. It hadn't changed. But she had. Maybe enough. Rodriguez walked to the door and paused. They need a fifth bird. That fire's not slowing down. Command thinks 4 will do it, but they're wrong. Sarah stood, the flight suit heavy in her arms, her voice steadier now. Then maybe it's time Ghost flew again. The hangar lights buzzed overhead. Dust floated like quiet ghosts. Sarah reached out, touched the cockpit. For the first time in 3 years, her hand didn't shake. The doors swung open mid-sentence, halting Colonel Grant's voice in the middle of a command. Heads turned as boots echoed across the concrete floor. Sarah Bennett stood in the doorway wearing a flight suit no one had seen before. Her name patch faded but clear. Her shoulders were square, her face calm. The same woman they ignored yesterday now filled the room with silence. She walked to the front without invitation, without apology. No clipboard, no hesitation. The room parted like she didn't need space to be given. She stopped beside the digital map, still showing the flawed plan. The fire had shifted again, threatening the evacuation zone. She spoke clearly. If they didn't change the flight pattern, they would lose everyone trapped in Sector Delta. Grant opened his mouth, but she was already uploading a file to the command terminal. The projector flickered, then filled with rows of encrypted documents, mission logs, deployment history, kill ratios, combat saves. A name appeared across the top: Captain Sarah J. Bennett. Call sign Ghost. The room froze. No one breathed. A chart showed her service record: 4 tours, 65 missions, 47 confirmed saves, 2 silver stars, 1 distinguished flying cross. Another screen followed: helmet cam footage, an A-10 tearing through a smoke-choked canyon, carving a path for medevacs. Rodriguez's voice came from the back of the room. "This is the one you laughed at." Thompson leaned forward, eyes wide, lips parted like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. Moore dropped her pen. Grant stepped closer to the screen, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. He turned to Sarah. She held his gaze without flinching. Someone whispered, "Ghost." The word carried weight now. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't myth. It was the woman standing right in front of them. Sarah turned back to the map. She began redrawing the flight pattern with steady fingers. Her voice cut through the room like a blade, measured, clear, undeniable. The others watched. No more jokes. No more smirks. She had once flown through a canyon on fire to save men who thought they'd been forgotten. And now she stood here again, not asking permission, giving orders. The same room that mocked her now hung on her every word. No one interrupted, not even the colonel. Sarah stood at the front of the room, the fire map flickering behind her. She pointed to the ridgelines where winds funneled through with dangerous speed. Most would see that as a problem. She saw an opening, a tactic. The terrain could be used to turn the fire inward, to choke its fuel lines, and open an exit corridor. She outlined a formation most of them hadn't flown before. Staggered altitude inverted sweep. Suppression drops at low elevation using the wind's momentum. It was risky. It required precision and trust. But it was the only way to stop the fire from overtaking the last team still trapped in Sector Delta. Thompson crossed his arms, but his face showed less doubt now. Moore glanced toward Grant, waiting for a reaction. One of the younger pilots spoke up, said the plan could work if the drops held and the heat didn't push too high. Sarah looked around the room and nodded once. She wasn't asking them to believe her name. She wanted them to trust her mind. Rodriguez stepped through the doorway carrying a clipboard and a look that needed no words. He gave her a small nod. Ghost is fueled, loaded, and cleared for launch. Her aircraft had waited long enough. Sarah moved through the pre-mission prep like a conductor setting tempo. She didn't hesitate. Not once. Her voice, carried with confidence, earned the hard way. The pilots followed her lead. They checked maps. They adjusted flight paths. No one challenged her again. Colonel Grant stood near the wall, arms crossed, unreadable. He said nothing as she handed out assignments. He didn't need to. She wasn't looking for approval. She was making sure the mission succeeded. Then, Harrington, a civilian liaison with no combat time, stepped in and told her the formation was too aggressive. That command might override it. She turned to him slowly, her voice low but sharp. Then tell command to clear the airspace, because Ghost is going hunting. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't shock this time. It was momentum, a storm gathering around her, not against her. The pilot suited up without another word. Sarah grabbed her helmet from Rodriguez on the way out. He handed it over like he was giving her back a part of herself. She nodded once and headed for the flight line. Behind her, every doubt she used to carry stayed in that room. Ahead of her, the sky burned, and she was going straight through it. The sky over Canyon Ridge boiled with smoke and heat, and unnatural dusk hanging over midday. Engines roared as Ghost Flight lifted off the tarmac, 4 A-10s slicing into the haze with afterburners flaring low. Sarah's voice crackled through the comms, steady and clipped. Formation tight. Stay low. We hit the first line in 30 seconds. Visibility dropped to nothing. The smoke swallowed their altitude gauges. Ash swirled like a blizzard. The fire below roared louder than the engines chasing wind patterns, like it had a mind of its own. Sarah flew lead banking hard into a canyon, lined with dry pine and orange flame. Her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes never blinked. The first suppressant drop hit target. Coolant foam sprayed in long white streaks, carving a line through the fire just long enough for evac teams to push through. Thompson followed on her wing. Moore closed the tail. The ridge shook from the heat. The thermal lift threw turbulence straight into their bellies. Sarah adjusted trim and flattened her glide. Then everything changed. The fire jumped the line. A gust of wind took it sideways, throwing flame across the last remaining road out. Sarah checked the thermal map and saw its sector delta would be gone in minutes. She snapped to a new heading. Cut the line. Push the fire east. We're not stopping it. We're steering it. The others hesitated, then followed. They dove lower, weaving through terrain like it was muscle memory. Every drop counted. Every second mattered. Sarah led the charge, diving straight through a smoke tunnel lit red from the blaze below. The heat blurred her vision. Her instruments warned her off. She didn't pull back. The new ridgeline was their last shot. If they dropped suppressant there, the fire would split and burn out on the bare slope. But they had to hit it perfectly. Sarah called it. Full throttle. Wings level. Drops on her mark. One by one, the A-10s lined up behind her. She counted down. 3, 2, 1. Foam burst from the bays, carving a clean line across the dry ridge. The flames hit it like a wall. They surged, twisted, then began to shift. Slower now. Broken. The evac team's signal lit up on her HUD. Moving. Alive. The last voice on the channel was Sarah's. Ghost is going hunting. And the fire finally blinked first. The sun was low when Ghost Flight returned. Smoke still lingered on the horizon, but the sky above Canyon Ridge was clear. One by one, the A-10s touched down on the runway wheels, hitting concrete with the weight of something earned. No one cheered. No one needed to. The ground crews stood along the edge of the flight line, silent and still watching as the aircraft rolled to a stop. Officers from operations and command filtered out of buildings drawn by something they didn't fully understand yet. Sarah powered down last. Her hands moved with care, shutting off switches, guiding the aircraft to rest, like she'd done it 1,000 times. The engine spun down with a long, slow whine. She sat still for a moment, breathing in the silence. Not relief, just stillness. Then she climbed out. The ladder clanged beneath her boots. Her gloves came off. A breeze tugged at the edge of her flight suit. The crowd around the tarmac didn't move forward, but eyes followed her. Not the way they had before. No whispering, no sideways looks, just quiet, real, heavy, quiet. Rodriguez waited at the far end near Hangar 2. He wasn't smiling like a man surprised, just like a man who had always known. She walked toward him, and the distance between them felt shorter than it had in years. He gave her a nod. Not proud, just right. Someone clapped once in the background, then another. It didn't turn into applause. It didn't need to. It was enough. Sarah looked around and saw more than approval. She saw recognition. Pilots she hadn't spoken to, crew she barely knew, all of them looking at her not with admiration, but with understanding. Not because she came back alive, because she'd brought something back with her. She had changed something, not just the outcome of a mission, not just a fire line. She had shifted the ground beneath the feet of everyone who thought they knew who belonged up there. And for the first time in years, she wasn't holding her breath. She let it go. The sun had nearly set when Sarah saw her. Emily stood just past the hangar doors, hands clasped around a small envelope, her hair pulled back the way it always had been in the old photos. She looked older than Sarah remembered, but calm, solid, like someone who had already made peace with a storm. Sarah walked over slowly, unsure if her feet were really moving. They hadn't spoken since the funeral, not in person, not face to face. Emily reached into her coat pocket and held out the envelope. "David wrote this the night before Kandahar," she said. "He meant for you to have it." Sarah froze. Her hand hovered unsure, but then she took it. Her fingers closed around the paper like it might vanish. She started to speak, but Emily touched her arm. "You didn't let him down," she said softly. "He didn't die because something went wrong. He died because something went right. 15 men came home because he stayed with you. He always believed in you, even when you didn't." Sarah couldn't answer. Her throat locked up. Her eyes burned. Emily gave her one last look, warm and steady, then walked away, leaving her alone with the letter. She sat on the wing of her aircraft, the hangar now empty, the lights above humming faintly. The envelope was thin, the seal worn. Her hands shook a little as she opened it. The handwriting was familiar, unmistakable. She read it slowly, her breath catching on every pause. David's voice came through like wind through trees. He talked about the mission, about the odds, about what mattered. He said courage wasn't just flying through fire. It was trusting yourself to fly again after. He said he hoped she'd never carry guilt for choices made in war. That forgiveness wasn't something to earn. It was something you had to give yourself. That she was always the best of them, even if she couldn't see it. When she finished reading, Sarah sat still for a long time. No tears at first, just quiet, deep, like something heavy had shifted. Then finally her shoulders dropped. Her chest let go, and the weight she'd carried for years lifted just enough to let her breathe again. The office was quiet when Colonel Grant extended the offer. His voice carried none of the sharp edge it once had, only respect, a full return to active duty, flight command if she wanted it. The squadron had already voiced their choice. They wanted her to lead. Sarah didn't answer right away. She looked around the room, then back at him. Her eyes were steady, her voice even. She said there was something she needed to do first. A letter that had waited too long. 3 years. Too long. Grant nodded. He didn't press her. Maybe for the first time he understood she didn't need orders to do what mattered. She rose from the chair and walked out into the fading daylight. The runway stretched ahead of her, empty, still. Beyond it sat the aircraft that had waited just as long. Ghost. Not a secret anymore, not a burden, just part of who she was. Sarah stood at the edge of the tarmac with the wind pulling gently at her sleeves. She thought about David, about Emily, about Rodriguez, who had never stopped believing. She thought about the pilots watching her now, not as a myth, but as a leader. And she smiled. Not because the weight was gone, but because she finally knew how to carry it. She turned toward her quarters, toward the desk, and the blank page waiting for her hand. She would write the letter, not for closure, but for beginning, for the ones who made it home, for the one who didn't. Ghost was no longer a shadow. She was a future, and Sarah Bennett was ready to live for them.